Yeah, most of the conversations revolved around rail and bus. For myself, I'm on the tollways constantly. Over the last 20 years, probably the best idea that's come out of the government agency has been the iPass, just for gridlock reasons. I was wondering if you guys could address the success or talk about iPass.
Kevin, why don't you start with that?
I would agree with you. I can't provide much more detail than you can. It's clearly a great example of where technology has caught up to the idea, and it's reduced a lot of air pollution that occurred when people just backing up at the toll collection.
And if you want to get rid of gridlock, that's the way to do it. It's called competitive price congestion pricing. They've done it in London and Stockholm. They raise taxes like crazy to try and get people to drive less in the inner city and so in the downtown area in London. It didn't work, but when they started congestion pricing, it dropped car congestion in the inner city, in the downtown area of London by over 20%. The same thing has happened in Stockholm where they've implemented it as well. That would be a great way to reduce congestion. It's called congestion pricing. That would reduce gridlock on the highways. That's the best way to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is an historic occasion. What you're observing is 100% agreement between the two of us.
The left and the right. John, what would your readers think of congestion pricing with the Stockholm syndrome being brought to Chicago?
Well, if it works, I think some people would support it. They tried it out in California some years ago. Where they had HOV lanes, and if people who are willing to pay more to drive at 55 miles an hour rather than in gridlock in the Los Angeles area would pay this higher toll. It worked for a few years, but then everybody glommed over to it, and those high-speed lanes became congested also, and people didn't like the higher toll.
The solution to that is to raise the price higher. Also, keep in mind that, in fact, you should, if we implement congestion pricing, reduce the gas tax, because the government will be getting more and more revenue from congestion pricing, and you need to reduce the gas tax to offset that. Otherwise, we're just going to be getting these people $2-3 million pension benefits instead of $1 million pension benefits.
Back here.
I am an Evanston resident, so we have both the presence of the CTA and Metra in Evanston, and actually, quite frankly, I'm a little concerned about the infrastructure there. It borders almost on dangerous with the underpasses, with concrete falling, with you're able to, on the Metra underpasses, see the light of day through the underpass. And I wondered, first, how do those projects get prioritized in terms of getting those infrastructure repairs done? And then also, what is the mix on Metra's, CTA's involvement, as well as local, national funds being used for that?
Phil, this has been something that you've been concerned with.
We have a bridge rehabilitation program. The Evanston bridges, by the way, is in the next phase. Well, I mean, they're there because of need. I mean, we're dealing with an infrastructure on Metro alone of somewhere between $7.5 to $10 billion. You put the CTA in that mix, and we're the two big animals. I mean, we're looking at $20 to $25 billion of infrastructure. We have to make some decisions on a daily basis as to where you get the money and what projects get the money. We have said historically we will not do, and our capital program reflects it, the Star Line, the Southeast Service, the expansion of service on the UP and the Northwest Line. If we do not get a capital bill this year out of Springfield, those projects will die because we cannot afford to have our current infrastructure get into a state of disrepair. We've been through that. I mean, anybody that was in this region in the early 70s and early 80s, I mean, I remember going on the Rock Island Railroad and literally seeing on the car the roadbed. We can't go back to those days, and we won't go back to those days. Either we won't run the service, which is one, or we'll make the improvements and sacrifice that relative to our new programs. The item that you're talking about, the allocation between the CTA and Metra and PACE, it has been historical. There's been some question, has the suburban interest been always looked at as carefully as the city interest? I mean, I will say that, yeah, we could always use more. I think the allocation as it stands today is relatively fair. But we're dealing with, you need $1 billion and you only have $100. How are you going to allocate the $100?
You raised an interesting point, and I'd like you just to plug it for a second. We let Jim plug his website. So if people are concerned about this impending capital crisis, if you will, what can they do about it? If they're worried about the concrete falling on their head in Evanston, or if they're worried about trying to get the Star Line or high-speed rail constructed, what can they do about it?
Well, clearly write your representatives. You can get onto the RTA has a business group, individual citizens group, a website that you can sign up for. I'm not a legislator. I'm not going to tell the legislature what taxes or what fees they should put to get the capital needs for this region. All I can tell you is that we need capital dollars as well as operating dollars to function. Now, if this region decides that they don't need public transportation, then say it. We'll go out of business and you won't have to worry about the pension plans.
I mean, let's put this in a larger context. The discussion we're having this morning is probably occurring all over the nation right now, in Western Europe as well. I mean, the reality is we have a huge infrastructure crisis in this country. The gas tax has about half, the federal gas tax has about half the purchasing power it did in 1965. Cars have gotten more efficient, steel's gotten more expensive. There has not been the political will to raise the dollars necessary. It's not just Metra. It's the highways, it's water, it's sewer lines, it's the electric grid. The infrastructure in this country is crumbling. And the big picture question here is, are we going to continue to bleed this system to death and gradually become a second-rate economy? Or are we willing to make the kinds of investments that China and India and Southeast Asia are making in order to invest in the infrastructure that's required to make this nation competitive? We can argue on the edges, between some of us. I'd argue we need far fewer highways and far more mass transit. But the bigger picture here is: are we willing to pay what it costs to maintain infrastructure to be a competitive economy?
And let me just say, John made a comment too. I mean, I hear a lot about Europe, and how wonderful that system is. It's a great system. It is on average 60 to 70% funded by their own government. Privatization that Jim is talking about, yeah, they'll operate the system privately, but every capital dollar that goes into the system is going into the system by either the city of Paris, or the government of France. So it's not all of it is being run privately. They're running a small portion of the overall cost to run that system.
And